Hey, for everybody watching YouTube. Hi, everybody. I'm Edward.
I'm Cole.
Hey, y'all might know him. Let's face it, if you're watching this, you know Cole. So, hey, Cole, you, before we get started with the podcast recording, I figure we'd say hi to everybody out there, out in YouTube land. Cole's very busy this week. So,
Yeah.
hey, I really appreciate you, cutting out some time to make this happen because, well, you're busy. So thank you for this.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And let me address the elephant in the room, so to speak. This is my bad. I put the H. The H is in the wrong place down below. I apologize. I am mortified.
It's right. It's almost a pun.
It's
like where are the games with Wehrle? It's okay.
Thanks. But anyway, I figure I would get that out of the way for the YouTube folks, and I don't need to hear about this on the podcast because, well, nobody can see it there. So, all right, there's that. Hey, I'm going to be monitoring the comments, but keep in mind, this isn't an interview. Like, Cole's
right.
Co-host today. So we're talking games. We're not so much talking about Cole's games. I'm sure there's going to be some of that throughout or maybe at the end, whatever, obviously. But Cole plays games.
So, I do sometimes.
Yeah, a lot. Like, yeah. I talked about this during. Well, you know what? We'll save it for the podcast. All right, you ready? All right, All right, let's do this. All right. Yeah. See, the funny thing is, I used to do that big intro, and now I'm not doing the intro. So we'll just roll. Hi, Cole.
Hey, Edward, what's up?
All right, so joined today, Cole Whirlygig, designer of everything that you like to play that isn't Splatter. How's that? Okay,
I'll take that. It's the best introduction anyone could possibly give me.
All right. No, seriously, design John Company Second Edition, PAX Premier, Oath, and a host of other games. Lead. What is your official title?
So my title at Leader is I'm the creative director now.
Okay.
Which I've been for a while, and all that means is that I spend time on my own stuff, but a big part of my day is all the other stuff, which includes things like making sure like a root localization in another language has the right files at the right time, and the localization team that's working on it knows what they're doing, and like scheduling future projects and stuff like that. So it's much more of like an executive role these days.
Yeah, I was gonna say that doesn't sound very creative.
Well, it is. I mean, the way I tend to think about it is at Leader we have like 6 or so people on the creative staff, and it's my job to manage that bandwidth. Okay, so that's reasonable. Yeah. If someone needs like studio resources, or if I need studio resources, I have to go and make a little Gantt chart and help everybody make sure that their games get done on time. We have the company is very oddly structured because we don't use project managers in the same way. Instead, the project leads are project managers. But then they get to use me because I get to make sure that they have enough resources to actually finish their thing. So it's great. And it still gives me plenty of room to work on game design, but I love all the management stuff too. It's a big part of my job that I really enjoy.
You really enjoy that? Legitimately?
Yeah. Huh? Yeah. I mean, it's just a way of, to me, I love the craft of making things, and this is a really important part of it. So I'm not like one of those people who like just wishes I could just solo design all day. I would much rather like think about the infrastructure of the kind of creative infrastructure that we build. And it's funny. I mean, I had a chat with Kyle Farron many years ago, the artist at Leader Games, and I kind of asked him, like, did he feel like he wanted to become like an art director? Did he want us to hire other artists? Then he'd be like in charge of like the style and
right,
the
as opposed to the actual drawing.
Yeah, and he said, no, I actually want to like draw every line. And I said, oh, okay, that's totally fine. But that's just a place where like I differ, because I'm like, no, actually, I would love to have developer staff, a staff of developers, and be able to work a little bit bigger. And that's one of the things that separates my work at Leader from my work at Whirlygig, which is a lot more insular.
That makes sense, because I mean it's you and your brother. Just
yeah. Right. So we have, if something needs laid out at Whirlygig, I will be the person in design laying it out.
You have a lot more hats at Whirlygig than you do at Leader, right?
Yeah, and that's fun, but it also means that we have to work a little smaller and a little slower, and that's okay.
That's yeah, because you're not, and there's a advantage there in that it's not your day job, so to speak, and so you're
Right.
not worried about like, oh, if we don't get this game out, like we're going belly up. Like,
Yeah, that is Drew. The way Drew and I use Whirlygig is it's entirely built around the concept that every project will take as long as it possibly as it needs, which
that's
is very different from how a leader works. Where although we are very permissive, I mean, if we need an extension on time, we move heaven and earth to make those extensions happen. But when I come to work, I walk through a building that we own, and I walk through by staff members who have salaries and families, and we know that we need to keep a certain momentum, or this whole thing that won't quite work.
yeah. Whereas you come to work at Whirlygig, it's like, what am I doing today?
Yeah, I mean, Drew and I routinely have conversations of like, what if we don't come out with the game next year? Is that okay?
Right.
And it's like, yeah, of course it's okay. We're not planning on that. We have a lot that we're planning on doing, but yeah. So I'm creative director at Leader, and then at Whirlygig, just one of two.
There you go. All right. So when you were here and we did the live stream of John Company, the second edition, that not only was that a blast, like having you over here in studio is awesome. You and I enjoy hanging out. Like,
Yeah,
we have a lot of fun. But after the stream, you and I, well, not just you and I, but all four of us sat around talking for 2 hours,
Yeah.
maybe 3 hours, just talking games, and not even Cole's games. And that was all. And as I'm listening to this, and you're talking about how excited you are about Carnegie, or how much you really enjoy, and not the trope that has become conspiracy, or all these other games, but just you're like, oh, I've really enjoyed playing this game, that game, whatever. And I feel like that's so rare for having somebody in the industry that isn't that is on the design publishing side of things, to where you play a lot of games that aren't for work.
Yeah, it's weird. There is something funny about this industry. I mean, I don't know if it's true of most creative industries, but there's something strange about our industry, where I feel like I run into a lot of people who do design, but who don't play, or who only play things that are different from the kinds of things that they design.
Right.
And I don't know if it's like an anxiety of influence problem, or if it just has to do with you work on something all day. So like when you go home, you just kind of want to like watch some television or something. And I get that, or read a book or whatever, go on a walk. And I love all those things too. It's just, I really love games. I mean, I make it I really like I like them as objects, and as objects of thought, but I make it a habit. I was talking about this the other day. I try to go to, I'm very lucky in the Twin Cities to have a lot of very good local game stores, like tons. Like I can like walk to two.
The community in the Twin Cities is like, y'all have
it's cold here, and so you've got to do something.
Fair.
But I mean, I think about like the Source, which has been around for a long time, and one of the groups in the Source, the wargaming group, is like a 30 to 40 year running group. Like they've been playing.
I so want to come and visit that, just because I've read so much about and heard so much about this group up there. It's amazing.
Yeah. One thing I try to do every week is I try to like go to a game store and just walk around it, and like look at games, and kind of have the like, do I want to buy this? Like what the kind of, I really want to just like think about, what does it look like to walk around in a game store in 2022? And what are the kind of games that I'm like finding myself pulled to, or that I think I don't actually like. And I was talking about that with someone else who I work with, who was like, I haven't been to a game store in like a year. And I was like, I don't understand how you live. I mean, that to me is like an important, if I need like a break from the work I'm doing, I'm like, yeah, I want to go, like, I'll just go. I just kind of want to like look. And I just think it's a useful way to kind of ground myself. So I mean, like this last week, I was like holding a copy of Twilight Inscription and wondering to myself, like, is this a thing that I would want to play? And kind of like sorting through my thoughts on it. And because it also helps, at this point, especially with leader games, I'm going to see stuff I've worked on those shelves, and I can think like, is this distinguishing itself on the shelf? It's almost like product research a little bit, but it's really just more of a feel. Like,
Sure.
am I a member of this like retail ecosystem or not? And yeah, I don't know. It's always an interesting kind of exercise. But beyond that, like I love playing games, and it's tough. I've got 3 small kids, and especially when the weather's nice, I'd much rather be on a sailing or biking or playing pickleball or something outside. But I still try to at least get together with friends like once every 2 weeks and play some games. And then I play a lot of competitive video games with my family and with Drew. And so we just try to stay at play.
That's remarkable and awesome and hard to do with kids. Let me tell you, I can appreciate this now a lot more than I could have a few years ago. So, yeah.
Well, and they get to play some of them too. One game I've been playing a bunch with my 2 boys, who are 8 and 6. We've been playing a lot of Starcadia Quest, which is not a game I would have ever played. But I was at a flea market and there was like a giant pile of it for very little money. And I was like, if this just gets turned into toys, these are pretty cheap toys.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a big haul of Starcadia Quest. And then I was kind of surprised to find that it was pretty good. It's not exceptional, but I think it, like, in its weird genre of whatever really it's doing, I think it's like pretty good. And it's especially good with younger kids. And so we've been really enjoying it. We're kind of playing like, a session or 2 every weekend.
That's awesome. I'm having a hard time tearing the kids away from Pokemon Go.
Okay.
That said, obviously when you talked about kind of video game stuff, you know what? It gets them wanting to go outside and walk around. I mean, I realize they're on their phones and stuff, but like all 6 of us will go out around the neighborhood, and we happen to live in a mecca for Pokemon Go. We have like 37 Pokestops like within a half mile. It's insane here. And so they're constantly like, hey, or can we go out and throw the football around or whatever? So they're not huge into board games. The kids do enjoy the occasional, but they're more into Fortnite and Pokemon Go and just being outside, like taking the kayaks out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We live right by the lake here.
Well, and it's all play. I mean, this is something that we've talked about before, like where I grew up. Like, my parents were very insistent upon like play. Very important. And they were also very agnostic about it. It was not filled with value judgments. So like these, dressing up like knights and smacking each other with wiffle ball bats, which is something I did for a while when I was in elementary school.
I didn't know you LARPed as a kid.
Oh yeah, okay. I was among the 12-year-old LARPers.
That's awesome.
But that was as good at as much play as playing roller hockey, or as playing tag, or as playing chess. Like, they were all play. And so my dad was always very good, my mom too, of like playing with us and showing us games. And so I didn't like grow up playing a lot of organized sports, but my dad was like very adamant of like, oh no, like football is a good game. Go learn how to play it. And so to this day, like but because that was unhinged from like any larger culture around football, we didn't like grow up watching a football game. I don't think I would watch a football game until I was like 20. But I had played football my entire life because it was like what you'd go play in the alley.
Sure.
And I'm trying really hard to like give my kids that same gift, which is like, it's been really amazing. And whenever my siblings and I get together, usually what we do is invent really dumb yard games and then spend the entire trip trying to get really good at whatever dumb yard game we've invented. And yeah, that's just, that's just part of how we hang.
That's fantastic. I love it. So talking games then, why don't you start off?
Sure.
Some of the stuff you've been playing.
Well, when I hung out with you over the summer, I was talking about Carnegie.
Yep.
Carnegie.
Yes.
Carnegie. Yes. Which I've still been playing and still really enjoy. And I'm now at the point where like using the expansion rooms. Haven't started the bid variant.
Oh, really?
Is it good? It seems like it'd be good.
It's so good. Well, here's the thing. My favorite, I love asymmetric starting positions. And the way they do this is so simple and so smooth that if you the little sheet you have, I think it's like $50 to start with,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
then you either gain money or lose money depending on how you shift your starting resources and starting position. And if you just choose right down the middle, that's your basic without any kind of
Mm,
modifications. That's your regular starting stuff. So you don't have
yeah.
to play along if you don't want to, but you can. Oh, I want an extra supply cube, or I want an extra worker, or I don't need, I can start in the whole 6 points. That's not that
Yeah.
bad, whatever that may be. And I would
It
argue that
seems
there's no reason to ever not
to,
play with
yeah,
them.
see, well, and this is what we found when we started using the expansion, like rooms. We're like, oh, well, this is great. And I have been finding my own builds are getting increasingly weird. And
Right.
I'm
Yep.
now playing games where it's like, I'm going to run this very risky, like heavy HR build. And I am either going to win this game by 30 points or I'm going to
Or
be in last
crash and burn.
place.
Yeah.
And I had one where I was very close to winning, and then how the actions got drafted at the end of the game, I was like, oh, I haven't done anything in 3 turns because I'm getting so hard locked out of the game because I made too aggressive of a bet. And just I love how the player ambitions and stuff get managed. So I've still been playing that game, really enjoying it. And then I played the Old Prince a couple weeks ago, the new 18xx.
Oh,
Have you
and
played? Have
I
you
have
played it,
not. No, that's
Edward?
1871, right?
Yeah, it might be the best one.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's
I mean, I'm not speaking out of my hat here, whatever that expression is. I've played a lot of 18xx games, and 1871 is incredible.
why.
It
What makes it
okay.
so special?
It because do you know one funny? So I'm saying this from a place of affection. I love the genre, but oftentimes there are dead or obvious actions in
Sure,
18xx
fair.
games.
Yeah, yeah.
You get to the end of the game and you're like, I'm running it. If I make a little dollar error, I might lose or something, but I'm not really making any like interesting choices. Now,
Fair.
that has to do with the fact that it's an old style of game. It's like, it's a little bit like how baseball games can be sometimes a little boring, but the seasons of baseball can be very interesting.
All
Um,
right, I'll grant you that, I
okay. I
guess.
mean, I don't want to. Again,
You're
I like
fine.
baseball.
I'm a Reds fan.
Um,
It's been a
okay.
long year.
So what is really amazing to me about 1871, or the Old Prince, I think is how
Okay.
people prefer to talk about it, the Old Prince. What I think is really impressive about it is how many decisions matter. Like you'll be running the last OR and there will be interesting tokening happening and interesting possibilities of like buying a second diesel. There are wild things that happen. It inverts a bunch of 18xx paradigms. So, for example, instead of there being like one railway nationalization event that happens in the second half of the game and like fuses up the map, instead you start with this like very sick and broken national system that gets privatized over the course of the game.
Okay.
Um, the initial private auction I think is very compelling and it creates extremely entangled positions. So there's none of this like everybody start one company. Now everybody start your second company. That is not how the game works at all. You can run one company, you could have four. The track building is awesome. You can only build curved track. So the actual track dynamics of the map are incredibly interesting. There is one private company that lets you build the single straight. There are like 10 rusting events. It's not, maybe it's 8, but there's more rusting events in that game than I feel like in any 18xx I've played.
Wow. All
And
right.
it's just wonderful. The weird way that it does, it's like both a incremental cap and also an IPO, like a non-incremental, a full cap style
Right.
game kind of at once. Like the way, like, okay, when you start, this is the last thing I'll say about it because I could gush about this game for a long time.
No, gush away.
The,
It's
the
it.
way that you start railways is awesome. It's really cool. So there are a number of railways in the game, but they get started in these tranches. So like you say like, I want in this tranche, we're going to have 2 railways started and I'm going to pick this one and someone else is going to pick another one. And no one else gets to start a railway until both of those have like either floated or operated. I can't remember. But what's interesting is when you start a new railway, you can either like pick a piece of the old dead government railway to like turn into the seed of the new railway company, or you can take an existing railway company that you own 40% of, and you can create a branch line that like force splits the company off. And so what it does is it gives the new companies this like weird running start, and then it lets the old companies, it kind of turns them into incremental cap a little bit. I'm kind of brutalizing some of the rules here, but it like allows them to have new ways of getting money into their companies. So it does fascinating things. It's super cool. It's pretty fast. Like we I think with a little bit of experience, you could probably play it in 3 hours, maybe 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And my only problem with it is it's still like considered a prototype.
I was gonna say, like,
It's
are
like
you
not
playing
out. Like
this
I
on 18xx
so
games?
so someone who's local to me made a copy.
Okay.
And so I played it with him once, and then I played another game on 18xx games.
Okay.
And I've known a lot of people who've played that game a lot, and they're like, yeah, it just keeps getting better. There's just like more to explore. And I think I have no reason. I do not know why the designer hasn't signed it yet, or maybe they have. I don't know. But it's great. And if you like 18xx games, it is worth the effort to dig into it, because even though it's still a prototype, it has an amazing level of finish.
Yay. Well,
yeah, there you go. That's a heavy game to look forward to.
And it's a prototype, so it's not available. Fits perfect with the heavy cardboard theme. Well done, Cole.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. I only recommend games that are not available. Right. What have you been playing, Edward?
So you mentioned Twilight Inscription.
Yeah, tell me about your feelings about this game.
All right. So, well, first off, I heard, okay, so I don't know, few months, maybe it was June. I think I finally got a chance to play TI4, Twilight Imperium 4. And it was a, I don't know, 8-9 hour experience, which is what it is. And it was cool. It was good. I enjoyed it.
I think that game is good.
Yeah.
So
it's a little long for what it is. But overall, all of it, I think it was a 5 or 6 player game of it, and we all came away from it, all of us being new except for Alyssa, I think, who taught it. We all rather enjoyed it. Like, we weren't, oh, that's amazing, but we enjoyed it. Yeah. So okay, so I had a taste of TI4, so okay, got that. And then Alyssa said, yeah, so I got Twilight Imperium the Roland right. And I'm like, so I'm stopping to think about this. What image does that come up in? And I'm like, how do you take like a 9-hour game and make it into a Roland right? And I'm like, and then she busted it out, and I just started laughing.
Sure,
because
it's ridiculous.
Ridiculous is the best way. It's just so extra, right?
Yeah.
There are 4 player boards for 1 player. And when we played it 4 players. So we had 16 boards around the table. And then the center board, for, the M, planet. I forget
Rex.
that. Yeah. And so there was that. And then there's only a couple decks of cards. And when Alyssa starts describing it, she's like, there will be at most 23 rounds in the game. And it's just funny. Like, this is a rolling right? But it's not. Yeah. So it took us just over about 110 minutes. I totally butchered that when I said it in a weekly look ahead. I said, like, it was right about just over an hour and a half, which for a rolling right is excessively long. However, for a TI rolling right, it was faster. We expected it to be 2 to 3 hours. And so I had no expectation other than, oh my God, this is a whole lot going on out here when we first sat down to play it. And then as we're going through, like, oh, that's not so bad, because of your 4 boards, they all have something else that you're focusing on. One is like supply, like get stuff. Another one is build ships and your combat board. Then there's another for exploring the galaxy, and there's another which is exploring planets within the galaxy. And so on your on a given round, you're just choosing one of the 4 boards to to work on, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's some dice you roll, hence it's a roll-in, right?
Right.
And so everybody can choose a different board in which they're working on their own. And it's actually surprisingly compelling and not as big of a, oh my God, look at all this information. It really
Mm-hmm.
isn't nearly as intimidating once you get
Interesting.
started, and rather enjoyed it. I came away from it thinking it was maybe a hair long, but it didn't, at no point was I like, oh God, how long has this been? And after an hour and a half, like that felt like the right amount of time that the game should be. So even
Mm.
though it's rolling right, you got to kind of take what you think of as a rolling right and throw that out the window, because rolling right
Mm-hmm.
is a 15-minute, 20-minute
Sure.
thinky filler, whatever. And this is just a reimplementation of Twilight Imperium. You have voting, you have laws, you have all of that thing, but obviously it's all truncated down. So it just kind of,
Interesting. Yeah, it is right on the edge for me because I don't like roll and rights. I mean, that's too harsh. I don't like replaying roll and rights. The first time I play a roll and right, I generally enjoy it. I have a good time.
like, oh,
And
hey, that was cool,
yeah, this
right?
is
Yeah,
cute. There's
yeah,
like a fun little
sure.
thing. I feel like I don't know, it's like a little slot machine or something. And then I will like get a sense of how the strategy works. But even the more interactive roll and rights, the level of interaction is so flat. And I can understand why folks like them. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I don't think they're bad. They're just like the opposite of why I want to play games. But I love TI, and I'm interested in this. But I'm having this moment with TI where I'm like, I think a lot of people who are really enjoying Twilight Inscription seem to generally like roll and rights and then not have a lot of feelings about TI. They're like, I love roll and rights. I will play a heavy one. I've never played TI. And I'm kind of like, I like TI. I don't really like roll and rights. And so I'm like, I think I'm just setting myself up for disappointment. And I have almost bought it 3 times. I've gone to the store and like held it, like looked at it,
Caressed it.
and been like, is this play this a little bit? I'm not. And then I always say no right at the end. But I'm very interested to try it.
Well, let's put it this way. I tried a strategy. It didn't quite work out in our game of it, but I am interested. Like, again, yes, it's a roll-in right, but I think that's doing a huge disservice to the game. Think of it as a midweight Euro. Come into it from that kind of standpoint, because yes, okay, you're rolling dice and you are marking things off or filling them in or whatever it may be. But at no point did I feel like this was a roll-in right. I just felt like this had far more decisions than any other that I've ever played. Full disclosure, I've yet to play Hadrian's Wall, which is apparently the other
I hear.
giant. You have? Have you?
I've not played it, but okay. I do know
that. So yeah, that's the other like big, like meaty rolling right that I guess is out there. And I actually want to go and play that more, the Twilight Inscription. And on that note, has a solo mod, or solo. Mm-hmm. You can play it solo. And I'm streaming that on Thursday. So I'm looking, I've yet to play it. So solo, and I'm looking forward to that. But I also get to laugh and have some fun at the just comically, like,
I mean, yeah, it is like, it's just one of those things, yeah, right? I mean, like, totally. It smacks of the, like, I made this on a dare.
Yeah.
Or I made this at like a game jam or something, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just usually I don't expect it to make anything like truly great.
Right.
And it'll make like it's like a curiosity.
Like we made the joke like, oh, coming next, campaigns in North Africa, the rolling right. Let's just take this giant game and that I would say I think they did a pretty remarkable job of making it in a single city, like that could be a part of game day instead of a game day built around a game of TI4.
And I think there is something like beautiful and amazing about condensing a big game into a small game. So like one of the games I've been playing recently is Mark Herman's South Pacific, which I'd always wanted to get into Empire of the Sun, but hadn't done it.
Sure.
And so I finally got out South Pacific, and Josh Yearsley, who's the editor at Leader, he was coming to visit. And he was like, hey, let's play Empire of the Sun. And I was like, that's too much for me. Let's do South Pacific instead. And we just kind of slowly played a game over his trip. And then I've since played it again. And we just kind of sat there like learning it together and thinking about it.
Yep.
And I could not believe how brilliant it was. It was really wonderful. It's like one of my favorite game playing experiences of the year was not actually playing it, but like learning it. Because so much of learning a Herman game, I always feel like, sometimes when you're learning a game and you're struggling with a rule, you ask yourself like, what is the mechanical fundamental of the rule, or what is the thematic?
Right.
And so for some designers, it's better to learn a game by thinking about the thematics, and other designers, it's better to think about the mechanical underpinnings. And with Herman, it's like, no, it's the model. It's like this behaves a certain way because he has a particular way of understanding the conflict he's making into a game. And so studying a Herman game, and I mean this affectionately, is like studying chemistry. And you're like, why is a covalent bond different? Or like, why does an ion behave that way? And you're like looking at it, and the deeper you learn, the more you're like, oh, there is this like logic that is informing how this model works. And so for the Herman game, it was like, oh, like why do hits get soaked in this way? Like, why are carriers useful in this context? Because the game isn't telling you. And so when you're playing South Pacific, and I think this is true of Empire of the Sun too, you just make mistakes. You're like, well, I'm going to launch an offensive, and you do it, and you're like, wow, that was horrible. What was I thinking?
Right.
And then the next time you launch an offensive, you're like, okay, this time I'm going to bring planes. Because boy, I wish I had planes the first time I did this. And what ends up happening is as you stumble through a game, you start recognizing some of the tensions that he's illustrating. And I think no game in recent memory has done more to make me like rethink how to do conflict simulation. And here is my very short version of this in the context of South Pacific. In South Pacific, which is a game about the Pacific War and World War II, the Pacific Theater, your boats are never on the water, or almost never on the water. They're mostly in ports, which is, of course, how you should think about the strategic level of a naval war. It's not as if like you actually have a boat like sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean trying to find another boat. It's like, no, you have fleets that are based in certain ports, attempting ultimately to strike certain strategic targets. And maybe they run into other boats on the way, but they're always on the way to the other battle. And so it forces you to think about naval engagements as like, it wasn't like two fleets bumped into each other in the ocean. It was like your fleet was going somewhere. Another fleet realized you were going there and met you before you got there. And in the same way that like an Atlantic chase really kind of screwed with some of my thinking about how to model naval warfare, I think South Pacific has even further complicated that. And I've just had such a fun time exploring it. And, I know this is hopping ahead, but I tore out Empire of the Sun and was like, this is my next big project. This is like my winter project is going to be Empire of the Sun.
All right. Before we get into Empire of the Sun, I got a question about the way you're thinking about this. Are you thinking about it the way that Mark Herman models, or the way he's designed, like what you talked about? Is it theme first? Is it mechanism first, as far as how to try and interpret why this is here? Did you come into the game knowing that you need to think about it a certain way because it's a Mark Herman game? Or did you, like, if anybody else out there is grabbing one of these games, do they need to know that? Not need to know.
No. It is.
Or is it one of those that as you dig into it, you're like, oh, now I see why and how I need to think about it?
Well, it's both explicit and self-evident. It's explicit in the sense that in a Mark Herman rulebook, he puts the historical notes in the rules.
Right.
So like in italics, it'll be like, hey, this seems weird, but let me tell you why you need to have damaged all the units before you apply any second hits, or like why, US Army units can't like land on an island in certain circumstances. So he's pointing at you.
So he's informing you.
Yeah, he's informing it, but then it's also self-evident because what happens is you will read a rule that doesn't make a lot of sense, or that like seems strange. Like one of them has to do with when you're activating offenses, the other side can of course make these information rolls to try to realize what you're doing. And the way those numbers work on the cards is the smaller the offense, the harder it is for the enemy to detect it. Now that makes perfect sense.
Of course.
And
sure.
yeah. And it leads to these situations where you're like, oh, if I like sneak a little guy in there, you're not going to be able to catch me. But as soon as you have like a garrison, my one little guy I'm sneaking in, he's not enough. So now I need to sneak in more, but then that is potentially alerting a wider range of troops. And so as you start walking through this, you're not simply learning a few rules, you're learning like a living model of how Herman is thinking about like intelligence and war. And that is cool. That is just, it's just so much fun to learn war games. I think actually sitting down with Josh and just learning South Pacific, I was reminded how much pleasure there is in the act of like learning a complex game that is almost outside of the play.
It's like, almost like a hobby within a hobby type thing. Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I had for many years, I had a copy of Virgin Queen, which is a game that I never played, but I did set it up and learn it a couple times. And I got my money's worth because I felt like I learned so much about how this interesting design was functioning. And then I was like, okay, I also have learned that I will never be able to play this game because I just didn't have the right group at the right time or something.
Sure. Only play it at BGG Con. That's the only place I was able to play that. Yeah, I get that. So Empire of the Sun, since you mentioned it, when we went out to Mark's summer cottage, hashtag humble brag, a couple years before COVID, he had Jess and I out there, and I beat both Jess and Mark at Churchill. So therefore I can never play Churchill again. Yep. And because that's the pinnacle. And while we were there, we were talking about Empire of the Sun and how I'm like, yeah, I would love to learn it. But it's so intimidating, right? It's just one of those, I mean, he still loves playing it, years and years and years after playing it to death. And he still absolutely loves this game. And he's like, whoa, hold on, Edward, I can teach you how to play Empire of the Sun in 15 minutes. I was like, bullshit. Like that. No, it can't be done. He said, all right, you ready? So he busted out his copy and he runs through and he explains it to me. And he's like, obviously some of the nitty gritty I'm omitting here, but when he got done, he's like, that's really it. It's really not that complex. And I'm like, well, when you break it down like that, that seems totally, yeah, okay, you were right. Totally right. It could be done.
The thing that Josh and I found was once we started playing it, it was so smooth.
Right.
It was so smooth. But we would then run into these spots where we're like, I don't understand why that rule works that way. And you'd have to like break it back and, and do things like that. But actually it's an incredibly intuitive design.
So you enjoyed it.
Yeah. I love Mark's designs in general, but Empire of the Sun is really special. I learned how over the summer, I went through one of the tutorials in Pacific War, which I was also surprised is like very clean, like very playable. It's huge. It's incomprehensible.
Yeah.
But like super, super clean, interesting design.
Yeah. For those that don't know, Pacific War is a giant game. Like,
it has like 1,000 counters. It is, and it's not meant to be played. And
what do you mean by that? What
well, do you mean? Sorry, I'm adjusting what my son.
No, you're fine.
I mean that it, Mark knew that he was designing a game with like literally like thousands of hours of content.
Yes.
And you can engage with Pacific War by just saying, I would like to play the introductory scenario. And there's enough game there. And like some of the battle scenarios, there's a lot to explore. You don't need to hit everything. When you're doing
watching you fight this sunshine, you're totally fine.
I know this will be a podcast eventually. So I don't mind the fact that it's a YouTube exclusive to see me hit with a sheet of cardboard on camera. No, but I think that like, that way of thinking about the design, and he has a kind of humility about it where he's like, hey, Pacific War, If you want like a fast playing, exciting war game, like don't buy this game.
Yeah.
It's this game is a weird throwback. I mean, in some respects, the fact that it got republished at all is like, I feel like it's GMT saying thank you to Mark, and also Mark saying thank you to his core fans that would like let him do a big project like that.
Completely agree. It is a one of those. Yeah, it's an homage. Like, look, we know we're not going to sell a ton of copies of this. That's okay.
Yeah.
You've been good to us, and then I
Well,
agree with that.
and if you like go to any theaters or like watch opera or something, it's really funny how they always structure those seasons, because they will sometimes play like unpopular pieces because they're like, well, no, I mean, we want to like make sure that this like lesser opera like is heard. And I mean, and also not that I compare Pacific War to that, because I think Pacific War is a massive work. I mean, it is like it's huge and really exciting. And that the fact that it is that we have such easy access to it is really wonderful. So folks should check it out. I think the rule books are like you can just download them.
Yeah, GMT's pretty good about that. So yeah. So on the flip side of those, I figure I mentioned a couple others that I've been playing. Both throwbacks actually. Bonanza.
One of the best.
It is so good.
Best UE game, maybe.
It's special. I forget how much or how good it is. For those that don't know, it's the bean trading game by Uwe Rosenberg. And I don't know if it's the first game that did this, but when you get cards, you're not allowed to reorganize your hand. Hardest thing about the game, reminding yourself not to organize your hand. Like what new cards come in the back, they have to stay that way. That is the core aspect of the game. And it's a trading game that it's okay to trade things at a loss because the benefit can still outweigh the getting the short end of the stick, so to speak. And it's so clever and it's so good and it holds up so well. It never gets old. Every time I'll be honest, we played it at game day and I was like, if you don't want to play that again, we can rent it back. Like and that never happens for me ever. So yeah, Bonanza's so good.
Bonanza's great. What other old ones you been playing?
Glory to Rome, Black Box, because let's face it, it's pretty and
it is.
Have it. And
I feel bad that I've had my Black Box for like years and have not been playing it very much recently.
It's so good. It really is, and it's such a good game. It's messy. Like on the table, it just gets really messy.
Yeah.
But man, Glory to Rome is a great game. It really is. For Carl Chuddick design, like multi-use card game, and it's a grail game for a lot of folks. It's a simple game to where when you play a card on your turn, you have two things you can do. You can either lead, meaning do an action, and then everybody can either follow that, or think, meaning draw back up to your hand size. And then depending on what action you're taking, you're allowed to either build buildings, add to buildings, and where they get tucked in under your player board is dictated by what actions are available or got chosen. And the Glory to Rome moniker for the game or for the show here comes from basically telling your neighbors to go fornicate with themselves when you don't have the material that Rome demands. And yeah, it's great. I absolutely love it. We've played it now, I think 3 game days in a row.
Oh, wow. All right. It's back.
Yeah, kind of. It's one of those to where we had the right player count and we were like, we don't want to learn a new game right now. What do we, Glory to Rome. But yeah, done. Let's do it.
Cool. I love that. I love hearing that. I want to ask you about a game that you put on the list. Okay. Can you tell me about Bloodstones and if you're into it? Or you can hold your opinion. It's okay. I'm very
all right. So
we
have full disclosure. We have a sponsored live stream tomorrow for it.
Okay. Well, then we don't need to spoil it.
No. I will say this. Anytime a Martin Wallace game comes out, I am at least interested in checking it out. I used to be auto buys for me, no longer, because I don't enjoy all of his more modern designs. But there are classics that I absolutely adore of his. Like Automobile is still one of my all-time favorite games. Bloodstones is a fantasy tile playing game. Like like think dominoes, to where you have a hand of tiles, right?
Sure.
And it's mechanically pretty simple, but in our experience, the hesitation that I have about the game is it's an area control game that rewards players from winning combat, from winning battles. But it almost feels like you're disincentivized to attack because it feels like the defense has a bit of an upper hand. And so the goal of the game is to score points predominantly from placing out these villages around town or around the board and then possibly defending them. And it could be that we're thinking about it the wrong way, in that big stack army versus big stack army, the defense has an advantage. And so, but for every tile that is in that army, if you win, you get a point. That's a non-trivial amount of points. Like if it's a 5 stack versus a 5 stack or whatever. But I think maybe leading up to another play of it again tomorrow, by the time this releases on the podcast, it will have been a couple of weeks prior. But I think maybe we're thinking about it's not about big stack versus big stack. It's about small skirmishes and putting out your villages. So I think maybe early plays of it haven't quite been the way that the game was designed to be played. It allows for that play, but when it does so, I think it doesn't reward the players. I think it gives a bit of a lackluster experience from that. And so I think it requires, I'm far from an expert on the game so far, but I think it requires a different kind of area control thinking, that I don't want to defend everything I have. I need to not worry about going after your stuff. Just let me try and take this area and then kind of send out little raiding parties here and there instead of a big stack army. So that's a long way of me saying undecided.
Yeah, Drew. I like Wallace. Wallace is a tricky designer for me too. I like utterly instrumental in my thinking about games. Many of my favorite games he's designed. His more recent stuff, I think, shows a lot of his range as a designer, but also in ways that sometimes alienate me as a player. And like those things are fine. It's just like I like that he can flex his muscles and do a lighter game. Those aren't going to be the kind of games that I usually want to play from him. But I am always happy to like see what he's working on, because I think he's pretty interesting when it comes to how he thinks about different games.
And in that regard, I don't think it's a apples to apples comparison, but kind of a Vlado Chvátil type designer, to where, I mean, he's all over the place as far as what he can design, and that's amazing to me. I don't think Martin quite has that range, but I get what you're saying about that, and I like that he is going in directions that he wants to design, and I think that benefits us as gamers, that it's not games that he has to design, it's games that he wants to design. I think that's a guess.
Yeah. Well, and I was so happy to see Bloodstones too, because I really like him having his own imprint, having a lot of control over it. And I really hope it does well. And I'm excited to get it at some point, but
yeah, I mean, the prototype, the tiles are that, like in Azul, that kind of plasticky, but ceramic-y thing.
Bakelite.
Yeah, there you go. That. And some of the color choices weren't great, but that's been changed for the final. So, there's that stuff. But overall, undecided. And now that, having talked this out loud, I think that's going to benefit me tomorrow going into the play of it, that I'm going to change the way I have been playing it. And again, either that's going to work really well or a fall on my face. And either way, I think it makes for entertaining play.
Sure.
So, and that'll also help inform me on whether or not A, is my hypothesis right about this, and B, is it a game that I want to play? So we'll
Yeah.
see on that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the other one that I've been playing recently is actually here on the table. It's Underwater Cities, Vladimir Suchi game.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first played this, wasn't a fan. I love Shipyard, and I think Shipyard is his, his magnet is his best game by far. And I thought Underwater Cities was just really slow to get started, and it kind of slogged. Well, we played it, and we brought in some of the stuff from the expansion, which this is a question I want to ask you both as Cole, the game player, as well as Cole, the designer publisher. Having a expansion that fixes or addresses shortcomings in the base game, as opposed to just adding content or, whatnot. This does that because it has kind of a quick start aspect to it, and it shortens the game by 1 round. And players still have agency in that it's asymmetric starting setups. So I think it was really well done, and I think that made the game that much better. And we're going to be doing that when we stream it tonight. But what are your thoughts on that? A, on Underwater Cities in general, and B, thoughts on expansions that address.
I'm trying to think about it because I am one of those Carcassonne players who doesn't like Inns and Cathedrals.
Okay.
And I think Inns and Cathedrals is fine, but I also think that like it becomes kind of a different game than vanilla Carcassonne. My goodness. And so I tend to prefer the purer version of the game. Just give me the version as it was originally kind of outed. Now, sorry, excuse me. So I'm trying to think about good examples of a game that I feel like I would only play it with the expansion because the expansion feels like it fixes it.
Right.
The one that comes to mind actually is the first edition of Game of Thrones, the Clash of Kings expansion, which is like, okay, welcome to 2005, everyone. Sorry to dial us back that far. But that game really did fix the core game. And I think, so something like, as a comparison of a game that came out around the same time, the expansion to Twilight Imperium, Shattered Empire, only like half fixed TI. TI, like, to me, did not really get properly fixed until the 4th edition came out. And I think, generally I don't like it. I like expansions that are additive, but that don't try to change how the game is presented. So, there's a reason why all the root expansions, they provide content, but they are not like, there is no like root 2.0.
Okay.
If I'm thinking about, like a Cosmic Encounter expansion is going to obey the same logic, but like, I don't really have any interest in hunting down an expansion that is fixing like a base experience, unless I really like the game and don't mind putting a little bit more. Actually, I'll give you an example of that. Agricola. I think the Farmers of the Moor expansion to Agricola is incredible.
Agreed.
And I like Agricola enough that I'm like, yes, I will spend the $50. I will give you like the 1.5 patch, because a lot of times I think about these games as like 1.5 patches, right?
For me, the one that screams to mind is Tuscany for viticulture.
Sure, it was like you and I get it, because we made, after the first printing of Root, there were a few little balance adjustments that we made in the third printing. We haven't made any since. We might make one more, but they were all like pretty small stuff, and it was stuff that would have been very hard to catch with the testing bandwidth that we had at the moment.
Okay.
But as I'm like looking at Oath expansions, critically, I am not interested in creating a newly definitive version of Oath that is like Oath with the expansion. It's going to be like more content.
Okay.
And it will be content that changes the core experience, but not really. I think that usually, you just want to make another game. So this is the thing that I run into this with ARCs all the time, because ARCs is very much like a I'm like revisiting all the questions of Root, but from a very different vantage point. And they're coming out, and it's a space game. It's a totally different game. But I look at some of this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, in a world where Root never happened, this is like also how I would have done Root a little bit. But I'm not going to go back and make like Root the card driven expansion or something. Like that's not,
You're not going to completely change.
Yeah, I'm not going to viticulture Tuscany it, right? Like that's like looking at my shelf right now, thinking about if any of these games I have on my shelf have expansions. I mean, I think about like the container expansion, which is so bad.
Yeah.
Like very often what happens is I love a game, I get the expansion, I read the rules, and I think, what the hell is this? And then sometimes, okay, so like another one is El Grande, right? El Grande's got those like 4 expansions.
Right.
And most of them are very bad and make the game much less interesting, except the Intrigue one, which is extremely good, but is basically another game that you just play with the same El Grande bits. And so I never end up playing it because usually I'm like, let's play El Grande. And I'm like, oh yeah, Intrigue. We should play it sometimes. It's really good. I haven't played it in a decade.
But if you're gonna, the game tries to become something that it isn't, and I just want to play that game.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The core game. I agree with you. I want a game, and additive is a good way to put it. I either give me more of what I like or build upon it. Don't like change the core of what it is. And
yeah, I mean, it is funny to have me saying this, but like, I do not like expansions. Generally, I just don't. I think that there are certain cases where I don't mind content. And so like that's kind of the category I put Root and maybe eventually Oath in. But like with Whirlygig, I don't want to do an expansion for any of the Whirlygig things. And there are ideas that got put on the cutting room floor in both Pamir and John Company. But like I don't want to package those as an expansion because there's a reason why they're on the cutting room floor.
Fair enough.
And I think actually I'll cast some like small industry shade here. So a game that I quite like, even though it's goofy as all get out, is a game called Western Legends.
Yeah.
I like that game. I think it's a pretty fun, silly open world game. But the expansion strategy for that game is so content rich and so aggressive that I'm like, there is no world where this content is being explored by its player base. Because I like Western Legends. I have yet to play the Blood Money expansion. I have it, and I'll probably get I think I have bought the big box or something, right? I'm like, I'm on the train. I'm committing that sin. But the game is so content full that I'm like, I don't want anybody when you go to set up a game, you should not have to I want that process of setting up a game to be as simple and as welcoming as possible, and not like, here's a giant list of checkboxes. Which expansions do you want to use? I mean, that was a big reason why we engineered the advanced draft and Root, because I wanted a way for the game to gate its own content. It's like, okay, you're playing Root, play with the advanced draft. The draft itself will activate different parts of content depending on how that draft goes. And that to me is so much more welcoming than saying like, let's sit down to play this expansion with 12 variant rules. Which of these 12 variant rules do you want? Because the first thing I'm doing is going on to BGG and saying, which rule should I play with? And I will say, so one game that I've been playing recently that I didn't even put on this list is Food Chain.
Okay. Yeah. Food Chain Magnate. Yeah.
Food Chain Magnate, a great game. Very good. It's not my favorite Splotter, but it's a good game. It's not as good as Great Zimbabwe, though. Sorry.
Antiquity is like, you put a gun to my head. Which is your favorite Splotter? And man, there are 5 in the running, and really, it's Antiquity still for me.
See, I'm like Great Zimbabwe, Indonesia can.
See, and the problem with Indonesia is just the operations can get so damn tedious.
Yeah, that's
That's
game.
The only downside to it. That's it.
But the thing, so I Food Chain, it goes again. I played a ton when it came out. Haven't really played it since. And then there are enough people at the office now at Leader that have never played it or haven't played it in a long time. And I thought like, I feel like I'm now, it's been so long that I'm pretty bad at it.
Right. So I need to kind of relearn it in some regards,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And so I finally cracked open the catch-up mechanism expansion, which I've had since it came out. I have never played. And so many of the ideas in it are really cool, but I don't know where to start. And I know they have, they wrote the nice little, like, you should start with this version and then maybe play this version. But part of me just wants to either randomly build a scenario,
Yep.
or for them to just tell me this, play with everything. This is the new definitive food chain magnet experience, because I don't mind getting definitive. But I dislike the buffet approach generally.
I see, and I see your point on that, but I also appreciate modular, little mini expansion. Talking about like Food Chain Magnet, or a game that I've recently played, which is Clinic Deluxe, which has an ungodly
modules.
Amount.
Hilarious. It is just silly.
Yeah, it really is. I'm never gonna get to most of those, but so there to me, there's a threshold on how far that can go, and to where I'm just no, that's too much. But you know what? There's a whole lot of completionists out there that will eat that stuff up. That ain't me. And I don't think that's healthy for the hobby, because that's money that people are pouring into. Now, sure, are there the people out there that will play all of the expansions for the stuff that they got, like using Clinic Deluxe as an example, the, I don't know, 70, 80 little mini expansions? Will they eventually play through them all? Sure, there are those people. The vast majority will not. Yeah. So therefore, why not, invest in a different game, get a different experience?
Yeah, it's hard from a developer side. You want, if I know that we have a user base that wants more content, then one way that you fund the livelihoods of the dev team is to keep providing that content. This is the paradox model of doing computer games and DLCs, right, where it's hey, we want to make this big historical game. We can't make it at one time, so we're going to do part of it, and then we will open up the next little thing of content. And so I don't really I don't mind it in principle, but I do think, I don't know. I think you want, for the hobby, it is healthy for people to be playing the games that they have. And that isn't that anyone should feel guilty about the games that they have unplayed. I've got a big stack of unplayed games over there. But I think generally, these are objects that are meant to be experienced, put on the table, played. And it's interesting because sometimes I have played games that have come out and they just don't seem to be things that were ever meant to be played. And that's a little harsh, but what I'm talking about in particular are designs where if you did, I'll use my favorite punching bag here, and I mean this somewhat affectionately because I both like the designer and also like the game, is Ankh. So Ankh, I think, Eric Lang game, Simon production. Ankh is really an amazing design. It's very good. And the production is beautifully realized. And I'm so glad they found a way to keep all the sculptors at Simon employed with it. But it's such a bummer because the game is so irritating to set up and tear down and play that I'm tempted to just make one myself and just have a little fan product. I want in a root size box, all of Ankh, every piece of content, every expansion, all the different cool things that it does, and give me simple wooden pieces and a littler board, and that's it. And I would pay as much or more than the Kickstarter price for all the minis to give me the stripped down one that actually feels like it wants to be played when you open the box.
So it's funny because we used to joke that, people like their plastic dolls, right? I.e. all the bling, all of that. And it harkens back to the question of Ankh sure looks pretty, right? But like you said, is it built to be played? Whereas you, on the exact opposite end of that, you have Winsome Games.
Sure.
right, that are the extreme stripped down, but the playability is super high there, but the aesthetic isn't. And so I do think that there can be a happy medium between that. And are we, is it that those of us that are more mechanically driven that like
I don't know. I mean, look, I think
who's the
that is
audience for it? Because I would love that. I like that idea.
right. But I think, the way, and this is where I have no ill will towards Simon for this. I have ill will towards him for other reasons. But the I think with Simon, you always have to think about it from the perspective of their business model, right? Like how, and I don't mean that like in a like haha sinister bags of money way. I mean like no, they are trying to support, let's call it an artistic endeavor, and the artistic endeavor is produce these beautiful miniatures games. And in order to do that, they have to design the pricing of their products so that they can have a staff of sculptors and of engineers and of all the people that you need to make that stuff happen. And it just creates a set of incentives that are lined up with a particular way of imagining a product and an audience that wants that product, and not with the game as a particular object. And I think it's been interesting seeing Eric move into the mainstream games, because I saw a copy of Hand to Hand Wombat, which I know a game that he worked on a little bit. It's charming, charming game. But like that's a game that begs to be played. That's a game that you open up the box and like boop, it's just like ready to be played right away. And I think miniatures are not the problem, because you can use miniatures in all kinds of games and not have them be irritants. And I also think that like you can also do really lavish, beautiful productions that are very player first. But the exercise I wish every publisher would do, and it's something that I make sure that we do, is when you get a game that's near final, you set up a camera and you record yourself opening it up, taking it apart, and then setting it up to play the first time. And even before you do that with the final product, you are thinking about that test throughout the production. How hard is this going to be able to play? And that's where like the minis games lose me, because they have very complex sculpts, like a Warhammer figure that has lots of like little flags trailing and stuff. That is going to be irritating and difficult to take out of a box and put on the board. And I've got a big box of Cthulhu Wars around here somewhere, and all of my pieces are just in these big Ziploc bags, and all the goofy wings, they're all getting bent out of shape. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like I like that it has like a lot of shelf presence, but I'm not worried that like Cthulhu's tentacles is all in the wrong spot. Because I think that's the game to me that when I play that game, I'm like, here's the board, here's your big bag of plastic, dump it out, and then let's set up and go. And I mean, I had you
realize you're the exception to that, right? There are people out there cringing hearing that.
Well, this is actually like the new edition of Hero Quest, I think is interesting too, because I think in some ways they did a very good job with the new edition of Hero Quest. But the sculpts kind of bummed me out, because the old sculpts were very sturdy. And you could have a bunch of the little skeletons with the sides. You could have them in a bag and they weren't going to really bust, because they were like kind of thicker, sturdier minis. And the new sculpts are a lot more photorealistic. They look like the kind of 3D models you'd associate with a video game, but they're a little spindly. And so that means that they're just like less good as objects of play. They look better as miniatures, but they're less good as an object of play. And that we were actually here, 1 second, the show and tell and I'll narrate this for the people at home who are listening on the podcast. So I'm going to take out this game, Heimlich & Co., which is a really wonderful game. And we were talking about this the other day, because we were talking about just like art and immersion in games when we were doing productions. And there was a voice of like, oh, well, like a really beautiful photorealistic miniature, that's going to feel very evocative. And I get that. I completely get that. But sight is not the only sense being evoked when you play a board game. Touch is like as important or much more important. And I will stand by one of these big boys from Heimlich & Co., and I'm holding a like inch thick, like maybe 3-inch tall, glossy wooden pawn of a person in a trench coat with no art on it, but it has great heft. It feels great. and it has such good touch. And that's like another way of thinking about immersion in games. And like a spindly little miniature wearing a trench coat, even if it looked great, does not really communicate the same feeling. And one game that I'll mention that I've been playing a lot of that I really love is Return to Dark Tower. I think it's a really good co-op. I think if you like open-ended, difficult co-ops, Return to Dark Tower, excellent. Get over the weird tower and the after-driven nature of the game. It's very good. But the miniature design for that game is exceptionally good. And it's good because the miniatures all feel like they have gravity and they're like kind of bottom heavy and they have these really thick, big bases. And so, the tokens that come with the game in retail are also fine. But the miniatures, I think, are really, really well done. And they're well done because they understand that they are pawns in a game and not just like photorealistic representations or something. And they're a little spindly too, but even like I think about the weird spiders. Like if you look at how the spiders are set up, they're like walking cages, so that they just have a much more integrity as a shape. Anyway, okay, that's my rant about piece types.
So here now, I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it, and now that you actually vocalize that, I agree with you. Right? I think that there's a lot of merit to that. However, to devil's advocate,
go ahead.
If that's the case, is that going to sell as much? No.
I mean, this is the fundamental bet that CMON makes, is that they would rather. So it becomes, imagine that on a game you make, let's say $4 million. So this is a major company releasing a game. They're going to expect to make $4 million on that game. And they can invest in two strategies. One strategy says, we would like to make $4 million as fast as possible. And the other strategy says, we would like to make $4 million over a 5 to 10 years of steady sales. You are obviously going to choose the $4 million fast as possible. That is the fundamental like architecture of the CMON business proposal, because they know this is why they dump all the expansions at once. And I think they might be forced into that position because they have shareholders that they need to appease, and also because the size of the company, the number of sculptors. I don't know a lot of the details of how CMON works internally, but their business model is a response to their market position and footing. It's just like something that I try to avoid when I work on my projects, because I would rather not worry about just trying to extract the maximum amount of profit out of a moment.
So on that, the heft and the feel, is that why the pieces are the way they are in Oath?
Yeah. And in fact, they were very expensive. And then the factory kept saying like, if you make these half as thick, you're going to cut down your price immensely. And we said, no, we wanted really thick pawns, because that is the piece that the players handle. It is the focal point of the game.
I dig it. And yeah, I like those little tidbits, but I also think that's a really interesting, I guess, thought experiment, because in the end, it's the consumers driving that. Because if you, I mean, people are going to make what they can sell. So if you, like somebody in chat brought up the discs versus trains in Age of Steam. The discs, 100%, 100 out of 100. From a functional standpoint, I get the idea. I mean, who doesn't love trains, especially in this,
right,
group of folks that we have here. But in the end, the discs are just much more functional, and so yeah, give me.
They also look better in aggregate.
Yeah.
There's like a weird thing that happens, and the trains are a good example. The other example I always think about is Martin Wallace's Waterloo or Gettysburg. So he made these two war games that have like cutouts of the little soldiers, like little wooden soldiers, but the cutouts are kind of busy. And so what ends up happening is when you like look at the whole board, you just see like a lot of lines, and a simpler shape would communicate like a lot more meaning a lot faster. But it's a place where like if you're designing a little wooden train, well, you like want to make the individual train look cute. and you're not thinking about what does it look like when you put a lot of them.
Right.
And I, my only complaint really about the Capstone Games Iron Rails line is I wish they'd use cubes. I get that clay can't. Like those little wooden trains are going to sell more games than cubes would be, but I think cubes would look better.
I agree. You look at how Winsome Games, right? Granted, they're not selling a ton. He's
Sure.
not making a ton. You get the idea, but yeah, form and function. Where's that line? And I mean at its core, that's what this description or this discussion is all about. Is where do we draw that line? And I think it's interesting to hear your thoughts and how that influences both your designs as well as from a publisher when you put on your publisher hat, the designing of or the functionality of a game as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fascinating. I really do. Like this is not where I thought this was going to go today.
Well, that's all right.
This is great.
We can go back talking about games, but
no.
We are talking
like,
about
shut
games.
up, Edward. Let me hear Cole talk. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just like I think sometimes there is a sense that people in the hobby, they're either trying to make a bunch of money and fleece people, or they're like off wandering on the mountainside, like looking for divine inspiration. And there's a huge middle ground. And I live in that middle ground because I love, when I start working on a game, one of the first things I do is I'll usually measure my table. It's like one of the first exercises. And I'll just say like, okay, so I know that I have like a production budget and I know that I have a rules budget, but I also have like a footprint budget. Like I can only spend so much of people's table space. And I hate large tables. I hate large tables so much because I think they take me farther away from you. Like if I can't put my piece on your side of the board, then I've screwed up because I'm somehow sitting at the wrong table.
Now I'm 6'2", but I feel very, very strongly about this 42-inch width. That's the perfect width. It fits every game, and it still feels approachable. I feel super strongly about this.
So when I was, and I've mentioned this on other places, but when I was working on Oath, like I measured a convention table and just a regular convention table, and I said, okay, like how much space do I have to use? And no one plays Oath on a convention table because convention tables tend to be a little narrower.
Yes.
But I love thinking about this problem, and then I love thinking about like how are the pieces going to fit in the box? What kind of pieces are they going to be? Like, is the box, because I want the box to be, the box should suit the size of the game. And I think I spend.
Oh, you don't want a ton of empty space in the box?
What? Yeah, I don't want a ton of empty space. But I also I don't want, and I think John Company is right on the edge. And everybody, by the way, folks should be getting traffic numbers. I think like essentially this is the week of September 26th or 27th.
Yep.
And people will probably be getting it within a few days in the United States, which is very exciting.
Which means you should have already gotten it by the time you hear this on the podcast. So
maybe, but also wait a few weeks before you email Drew, my poor brother. But when we were working on that, we made a call to not make the box about an inch thicker. So when people get it,
meaning higher, taller,
taller,
right,
not the walls thicker. But when people get it, the box lid sits about an inch up because of the punch. It needs to be punched. And there were a lot of reasons for that, but that is like a thing that Drew and I spent a lot of time talking about. And it wasn't like him versus me. Like neither one of us was like sure what the right way to do that was. And we decided to just aim on the side of like slightly tighter box. But we've racked our mind about this for literally weeks. And then I remember Drew came to visit and we had a production copy of John Company. And after we were done looking at it, I put it on my shelf, and Drew's like, this whole time I've been thinking about this John Company box as being like colossally large, but it's kind of small compared to any other like $120 game.
Yes.
And it was just this like moment of like, oh yeah, people are so goofy about how they use their boxes. And actually, Carnegie has got a great box. Very, very well. Both of them are very well sized.
And the insert.
So, the insert, really but even the non-fancy version, which doesn't have a fancy insert, that box is a great shape and size.
See,
it's like a nice book.
I don't own it. I've only seen the deluxe version, and I'll be honest, that version's great, and the insert, it's perfect. It works so well. So that's my only. That's what everybody in our group has, so I can't compare it. But yeah, I think it works really well. Really
Yeah.
well.
So I mean, I just I think it's useful to think through those things, and because at the end of the day, we're making physical objects, and so you want to be like attentive. I mean, I don't want to. I'm not going to turn this into like just a list of my usual rants. But like the thing I always talk about is like rule book size and like the industry's obsession with square rule books. Even really good publishers will have the weirdest format of their rule books. Like no one in the book arts thinks that a giant square rule book is a good format.
I agree. Just give me a
It's
normal,
horrible. Yeah.
8.5 by 11. I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Or there's a whole variety of chapbook formats and different aspect ratios you can use
Right,
that are so much.
Is not. Yeah, I agree.
Well, and you get into this question of like how many words, because it's just this weird thought that happens with publishers where they say things like, I mean, I can see the logic of like, well, we want to reduce page count, so let's get bigger pages and put more words on the page. And I'm like, no, do one idea a page. And actually, I'll give Clay some credit here. The capstone rulebook for the estates is very good. It's long, but it is laid out in such a way that each page really only presents one idea at a time. Makes for a very enjoyable reading experience, almost like a little magazine.
You are such an unique person to talk to about this stuff. This is fascinating to me. Yeah, that's not something I would have ever stopped to think about. And I mean, I read rule books for a living, arguably, and I mean, I have pet peeves about various, about rule book layout and design. That is one I think has always been there, but I don't think the idea has fully coalesced for me. But what I will say is I hate in this, you just put words to the idea that don't start an important concept, like with just a little blurb there at the end of the page, and then have me have to go to get to the meat of it on the next page, because that's just, it makes it really hard to reference, first off.
Sure.
And secondly, it's just, I guess I never thought of that.
You need to be thinking about your rule books and spreads. And I'm really addressing people who work in rule books right now, but like, don't think about them just as words, but think about them as spreads. The biggest thing that's changed in my own editorial practices, and this is something that Josh Yearsley is very much an equal partner in this with me, because I think he and I both started doing it at the same time, of putting our rule books into layout earlier in the process, because we want to know, like, okay, like what should be on the facing page. If I'm reading a rule and struggling with it and I look to my right, what do I see? And because I don't want to like give them a whole nother thing that they need to worry about, and like being very strategic with your examples and all that kind of stuff. And so
that is a huge thing. As somebody who learns the game, that right there, that little idea of not having to, okay, I'm reading about this and now go back 6 pages.
Yeah.
That is, yes.
This is why I'm very interested to see what people think of the John Company rulebook, because we worked really hard on it in this specific regard, because John Company is a hard game. It is probably the most complicated game that I've ever done, that I probably ever will do for at least a long time. But instead of giving people like a 25-page, very dense rule book, we gave folks like a 40-page. It's 48 pages, but that includes other stuff too. But it's about 40 pages for the core rules. And it includes like examples, blank space. Like there's a lot. It like really tries to slowly, I want people to approach it like they're reading a magazine.
Now you're going to make me, I can't tonight, but now I want to go back and like actually read it from that standpoint, because I'll be honest, even though I've been doing this for years, I've never stopped to think about that with rule books. And I think all you've successfully done now is going to piss me off when I read rule books consistently. I'm like, why isn't it like what Cole said? So yeah, I thank you.
Yeah. And I think there are all these interesting tools that people have when you're doing this kind of editorial stuff. Like for example, some rule books really need an index. I think about like Herman's games. like absolutely need an index.
Oh, of
And
course.
it's because concepts, like it's because that model is very strong. And so concepts are reappearing in unlikely places because they have relationship to the model itself. Whereas a lot of like Oath, I believe has an index. I can't remember offhand. Pretty sure it does. But like Pamir and John Company don't, because every rule that you need is generally in the place that you think it's going to be. And if it's not in the other place, there is almost certainly a reminder text that is going to remind you of it in that other place. And so I made the call as we were working on the John Company rulebook, like, does this need an index? And I just started watching where people were asking questions when they would do a rules read. And I'm like, it doesn't need an index because it can all be done intertext.
Interesting.
There you go. And that actually, just as a small footnote too, every rule book, there's no one way to do it. There's no like perfect way to write a rule book. A good 18xx rule book is very different from a good wargaming rule book. Is very different from like a good mainstream hobby game rule book. And so you just like want the product to a rule book strategy should adapt to what the game is like.
I agree with that. And I'm sitting here trying to think about like various war games in 18xx and like your heavy Euro, if you will. And yeah, no, those very much should have different layouts. I agree. Huh. Yeah, this is fascinating. This is good stuff, man.
It's rulebook chat.
Who knew? Come for Cole, stay for the rulebook chat. All right. So look, I know you have family stuff. You got your Essen is coming up, and you got stuff. So I don't want to keep you too much longer. But people, I mean, they did come here to hear about games from you. So let's briefly talk about like anything that you've recently either acquired, anticipating, stuff like that.
Sure.
Go. Shoot.
So I usually pick a big heavy game to do in the colder months. And I think this year it's going to be Almoravid. Last year I did Nevsky and like loved it. And so I'm really jazzed to get into Almoravid. And then Empire of the Sun will probably be part of that too. And then in the immediate,
you're just a huge Vocal fan.
I do really like his work. And I think that the campaign Levy series, it's like hitting me very close to my heart, which is like, I'm very interested in medieval history. And also I love operational war games. And so it's doing everything for me.
That's Vocal Runke for those.
Yeah.
Listening.
And then the one weird thing I'm excited for is the new Arkham campaign. It seems like there's about a new one every year, and usually around fall. And this is the Arkham Horror living card game published by Fantasy Flight, which I started playing a few years ago, and it's very different from what I normally play. But someone told me, so I don't have any really interest or particular love for Lovecraft or anything like that, but I've often admired the design of the Call of Cthulhu RPG. And then I really, someone told me that the Arkham Horror living card game felt like a roguelike as a board game. And I thought I love roguelikes. I've written a lot about roguelikes and board games. And their argument was, you're sort of playing with permadeath, basically. I mean, not quite, but basically like your character is getting weaker, both stronger and weaker at the same time. You're stumbling through each scenario. You've got this like persistent character you're taking through several sessions. And I like the campaign format. So while I was working on Oath, and exploring campaign format, I started playing the Arkham Horror living card game, found that I really liked it. It was just very, interesting because
from a mechanical standpoint,
because normally the deck, when you're doing deck building, you're trying to make these like very pure, like edgy decks. But in the Arkham Horror game, you're like stumbling into a scenario where like, oh, my deck is not the right one for the scenario. And so you're having to improvise, which means when you're doing the deck building, which are the character building aspects, you're building these like weirdly suboptimal decks that can pivot, which is very interesting. And then, so I think like as a narrative experience, I think they're fine, not amazing, not bad. But as a mechanical experience, like the actual scenario design, I think is great. And they do something, most co-op games are not modular. They're like, they're little set pieces, right?
Sure.
And then you like play, it's ghost stories. And like, there's like, you don't know which bad guy is in the dark room or whatever, but it's mostly the same kind of experience. Pandemic, even with all of its expansions, you're fundamentally just like playing Pandemic. And Arkham Horror is the card game is not like that. It's a co-op game that is more like a video game engine than it is like a board game. And so when you load up into a new scenario, like, I mean, one of the scenarios in the first major campaign is this like train that you're on, and you're like walking down a train, and then the train is being gobbled up. And then like the next scenario will have like basements and like scaffolds and interesting things, or like have weather. It's just it's such a cool design playground. So usually what happens is living in the cities, I will go to do Arkham Nights, which is like the big event, and the new campaign will come out and I'll play through it. Last year I played through the Edge of the Earth, or maybe it was earlier this year, I played through the like Arctic campaign. That was pretty good. So I'm excited to like build a character and watch him get all tore up.
Nice. Do you play games? See, now I'm trying not to turn into interviewer here, but I'm fascinated by some of this stuff. Are you ever playing games just to play games, or can you not help because being a designer and publisher, that when you play these, you can't help but look at it from that standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is like when I remember Kyle talking about going to art museums and how he felt like the more he learned about art, the closer he got to the paintings,
Right.
because he wanted to like see the little strokes. And I feel that, I mean, I feel this the same way about, to me, that is the fun of making something, is learning how those things are made. And that's the most exciting part of it, because you can look at a game and see like, oh, I see like kind of the number system they're using here. And, and it isn't, you don't need a lot of expertise. A lot of it's just intuitive.
Sure.
But it's a wonderful thing when you're playing like a Knizia game or something, a Knizia game, and you're seeing like, oh, I like kind of get how you make games, like where the first idea came, especially with Knizia, because he iterates so much. And so it's a wonderful exercise to like play Samurai and then play Babylonia and say like, wow, I can see your thinking on this subject, like changing over time.
Speaking of which, Samurai is one of the most stressful games I ever play.
It's Samurai is extremely stressful. I'm sure you've played Babylonia.
I have, but yeah, Samurai. I thank God it's not longer. I couldn't handle it. I am constantly stressed out playing.
It is so hard. It is. I have a copy, and I taught some people in the office how to play it like a week ago. And so we were just playing it over lunch. And it was interesting watching people being like, ooh, that's clever. Like, oh, what a neat design. And then just like the groans, like, oh, I can't make this move. You'll make that move. And I don't know what tiles you have. And it's great. Great design.
It's wonderful anguish, as I like to think of it. And we both have Flashpoint down for games we're looking forward to there. Flashpoint, South China Sea from Herald, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, Harold Buchanan. So I got a copy. I am gonna try something different with this one. Normally, like I like the process of learning games as well, which I guess I better considering what I do. And like kind of like what you said, like you like that hobby within a hobby. And I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit on how I learn games, and I'm going to actually like televise that. Like I'm going to do that live, which is terrifying to me, that it's not like a thinky filler. Like this is a meatier game. And I'm going to try and set up, like, I haven't opened up the shrink. I'm dying to. I want to read the rule book and everything, but I'm like, no, I want to try and do this so people can get a feel for how I go about that. But I love that process. I was going to say, I'll punch the game. I'll set it up like how it tells me before I learn anything, and then kind of look at it and kind of try and see how the game is trying to make me feel just from the way it's sitting on the table. And I love that process. I really do.
Yeah. Okay. So one, I'll say that's very, that you absolutely should do that, because I think it is interesting to watch folks see how you go about sorting through and understanding a game.
Right.
It's like, but also people get to watch you teach, and you've taught a lot of games. The South, I'm so interested in South China Sea, Flashpoint, South China Sea, right?
Right.
I can't remember precisely how the title works.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Flashpoint, and I'm interested in it for lots of reasons. One, I really like. I really like Harold's work. I think Liberty or Death is a really cool design. I love talking to Harold about design. I got to work with Harold on the Zenobia Ward last year, and I had a great time. It was just so nice to like have a product to work on with Harold. He's so smart, he's such an interesting just thinker. And I'm also interested in how GMT approaches doing a game about such a current event. Like that, this isn't gaming near history. This is gaming like, from like gaming to the present.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yep.
And I saw like an Abe card, like on the back of the box. And I'm like, oh, he got shot. Like this is like recently.
Yes. Like I think yesterday was his state funeral, in fact. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like, I'm just really interested in how they approach it, because I think GMT is usually pretty good about stuff like that, but they have a different kind of audience, a different kind of sensibility. Like this isn't the kind of game that would go out for a general audience, which gives GMT a different set of tools. And so I'm curious. I'm just really curious about it. But I have my copy in shrink. It's probably going to be a post Essen exploration because there's no time.
Yeah. So speaking of which, so you're heading to Essen.
As long as I don't catch COVID, I will be at Essen.
All right. Knock on wood for you. And it literally got decided on Sunday, and it was so close for us. It was a flip a coin almost between whether or not we're going or not. And it just barely made more sense to not. There are some risks involved that we just can't accommodate, and so sadly not going to Essen.
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear what it's like this year. Is it back to quote unquote normal, like pre-Essen or pre-COVID? Sorry, or if it's more understated this year. I'm super curious about that. But that said, I am going to be doing an Essen preview show for things that
I will probably listen, because I know nothing about this Essen. I've been so wrapped up in other projects that I'm going to Essen, and I'm like, well, I want to say hi to Jeroen, and I want to see some people I haven't seen in a while.
Yes.
But I have no idea what's coming out. I feel like I'm like frittering away like the best gamer gift right now by going to Essen, but not really knowing what's coming out.
Well, I by Tuesday, I got your back.
Okay, good. I'm gonna listen very attentively.
There you go. Yeah, I mean there's more stuff and everything, but real quick before you get out of here,
sure.
Just either from or both Leader Games, Whirlygig, Cole, Horizon. What's coming out?
What are we doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to capture it all. Let's do Whirlygig first.
Okay.
So
probably smaller. Probably easier.
Yeah, it's smaller. So John Company is being shipped right now in the United States, and we just got word that it completed customs and that it has customs clearance in the EU. So within the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks, most backers should have their copies. I have been, I've been as on edge about people getting their copies for John Company than any game ever. Not because I'm worried, but just because I want it to happen.
You're excited.
I've been waiting for so long. I mean, this is like the longest project I've ever worked on. So that is taking up a lot of Drew and I's time, just managing it. And we did something kind of foolish, which is we usually our language partners, what we do is we have the game come out and then we wait for about 4 months. And then we start doing the language localization process. And then the language partners get to come in for a second print run. And with this game, we actually decided not to do that and to start localizing it as soon as we finish the game, which has been a ton of work. And we will probably never do it again because
I was going to say,
but it does mean that like, if you are a non-native speaker and you're excited about like German John Company, that is going to be coming pretty closely on the heels of the rest. We're in file submission now. So that might be happening basically in like 5 months instead of a year, which is great.
Oh, awesome.
So we're doing that. And then we are setting our schedule for the next couple of years. We have 3 titles on deck, which I'm really excited about. Maybe 4, but we'll see about that.
That's ambitious.
We are hoping to do a crowdfunding campaign for our next title early next year. And the only thing that I'm telling you about it is it's a Zenobia game. It was in the Zenobia contest. It's something I've worked on in the past, and I've just been so impressed with it. And I think we will probably be able to make an announcement about it within a couple months, but it's going really well. And then we will probably do after that project, maybe late next year or early the year following, Infamous Traffic and another title which has some thematic linkages to Infamous Traffic, but I did not design. And that is really cool. It is one of my favorite games that I've played. Is this game that hopefully I will be publishing, and it's like a PAX game that is also a city builder, and it is such an interesting design. It is so compelling. And we'll probably talk more about it in the spring and early summer, and I'll be pulling in playtesters and things like that.
Cool.
But yeah, so excited about those things. All the Whirlygig stuff's going well. Traffic is in a weird spot. Drew and I have been playing it, thinking about it, getting it ready for the 2nd edition, but we haven't decided what we're going to change yet, because it is, as you know, a little tightly wound. And so with other games, it was a lot more obvious where to start. And with Traffic, Drew and I set it up and played it a few weeks ago when he was in town. And at the end of the game, we're like, well, that was fun. What are we going to change about this? Because we kind of like it how it is. So I have a little list of things that I'm going to change. There are production things about it that I'm going to change. But I don't have any updates on Traffic because we have started working on it, but we don't know what we're going to do yet. And then in Leaderland, it's very busy. I am up to my eyeballs in ARCs. ARCs is we will be having a big update tomorrow on the 28th. So people listening to the podcast, you'll already know it. But basically, ARCs is going really, really well. I think I cannot wait for folks to see the new kit, because it's just some of my best design work. And the development of the game has really sharpened it and made it very, very interesting. And the core game is almost done, and or is starting to get very close to being done. And the campaign content is 50% done. So what's going to happen is very quickly, the campaign is going to fill out in content, probably in the next 4 months, and all the art is going to start getting done. And then we're going to get it through the production process and everything like that. But it is, ARCs is really coming along. My goodness, this has been a big project. I feel like I could write a book about working on ARCs. It has been such a weird, gigantic game. It's both the cleanest thing I've designed in a long time, just simple, but the back end is so complicated and has been so hard won. And so I really hope folks like it, because I feel like I've been just pouring every bit of blood and sweat I've got into that game.
I have so many questions, but the good news is we can save that for a conversation post Essen.
We can have a talk sometime.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not like this is a one-off. So yeah. There's a million questions people are asking, but here,
I got some time. Give me the highlights.
Okay. All right. Well, first off, where are you going to be at Essen? So folks can come and fawn over you.
Essen, I will be around the Spielworks booth, but mostly I'm not boothing. I'm just wandering around. If you see me, say hi. I'll be hanging out with my brother, and my partner will be there too. So
there you go. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm coming to Essen just as a person who likes games. I will be doing an Ahoy playthrough on Friday and a John Company playthrough on Saturday, or the other way around. Uli from Spielworks is kind of hosting these, and he has the information on his page.
All right. Geez, so many questions. People loved your rule book discussion, by the way.
Oh, good.
I should have made notes on this. I apologize, but
no, you're fine.
There have been a lot of comments. That's nice. By the way, the Ankh stuff surprised me from you.
Oh,
Legitimately. I've yet to play it.
good.
I've only played Rising
it's good.
Sun. That's the
yeah.
only...
It is nothing like Rising Sun.
There are aspects of Rising Sun I really like.
Yeah, I think you know who's a huge fan of Rising Sun? Kyle, artist
really?
Kyle,
Yeah.
loves Rising Sun, and he tells me that like one reason he loves it is it just reminds him of playing Risk growing up. It like feels it's enough like Risk, but it has a kind of like silliness to it. I mean I think my ranking of them is I like Ankh the best, then Rising Sun, then Blood Rage. And I think even the ones that I like less than Ankh, they're still good. They're just not as in line. I mean, Ankh to me is I think just really a really smart game that I don't own because it's too big, and I want to like I'm gonna 3D print one and make a little. I'm gonna make my simple Ankh
a smaller. Oh, by the way, this is my nearly like maybe annual push for a redesign of which is never going to happen. It's become a joke. I understand.
Yes.
And now I can't think of the name of the damn game.
Union versus Central.
Thank you. I'm waiting for your redesign of Union.
I mean, look, here's the thing. Whenever you do this, what I do is I write John Boer an email and say, hey, can I have the rights to that game? Because I will publish it someday. Because I love it. And after the dust settles on these current Whirlygig projects, and I feel like I've got some breathing room.
Yeah.
I would love to just say, you know what I'm going to do for the next 2 years? I'm going to do like 500 copy runs of just weird old games that I love. And make like a nice version of you.
Oh, you realize if you started like a little subscription thing, like what old school, like what Martin Wallace and Winston.
Yeah, I think and then I can just like get a weird, and they can be things that I just want to see in print, like Mall World or something.
Oh my God. Like I am customer number one. Sign me up. I am in for that. So somebody, Chip asked earlier, how many of the Levy and campaign games have you played, and what are those teaching you? And more importantly, I thought, because that can be a very long answer, but will any of that show up in an Oath expansion, like some of the things you're taking from that?
That's a good big question. So I've only played Nevsky, and then I have demoed Amaravid and I've now learned it. I know how to play it. I just haven't played it yet. I'm super interested in the Henry V one, the like intro one. I can't remember the name. I'm also pretty interested in the Italian one too. I mean, they all seem super cool, right? I'll just say that generally, because these are topics that just no one has done a game about. And there's no way to get me more excited about a game than saying, here's a game on a subject no one has ever done.
Cole likes his esoteric.
I love, well, it's fun because that's where all the good stuff is. All the good history is. It's in the hard to tell stories.
Sure.
What they've taught me, like the thing that I've been paying a lot of attention to lately, and the reason why I've been playing a lot more war games is I'm very interested in this question of operational tempo. And so like I make a move that then forces you to act in such a way where you are deficit spending on certain types of actions in the future. And then we're getting kind of entangled, and
it's a race to the bottom almost.
It's like a race to the bottom, but there's also something very fluid and almost like conversational about it. And so the big place where people will see this in my work is when they see arcs, especially the new cut of arcs. There's just a lot of moments where like someone's going to make a move, and then you have to respond or not respond. And you can like preserve your offensive capability, but then when you deploy your armies, they might get all stuck. And now you're dealing with the fact that you made some bad deployments and your army's kind of like scattered over all these systems. And do you want to like spend the turn to kind of like pull them back together? Or do you want, you're going to try to find some other way out? And like that decision of like, when you start a offense and your army gets beat up and you say, do I want to repair and try to like reassess? Or is this my moment to strike deeper, to get further in? And that kind of operational tempo to me is such at the heart of Nevsky, and is also something that I've been finding in Herman's specific war games. And I really am trying to find ways of putting it into more mainstream area control games, because a lot of area control games that people play, and I'll put Root in this category, have very conservative systems of attrition and offense that basically say like, if it's your turn and you're the attacker, and you spend an action to attack, you're gonna like do a lot better, and you're gonna score like a known hit.
Right.
And a lot of the texture of those combats is about um, making sure that no one feels like they're wasting an action, which is a very Euro German style sensibility. And I mean that
positive
like
reinforcement.
yeah, it's. I'm thinking about John Bohr's note about the German style family game in German railways, and how it's like you want players to feel like they're taking these actions, and
In
that
German railways, you might not get turns.
You might not get turns, right? But it's like, which is like, yeah, the funny joke of that game, right? But like this notion that every action you're doing is advancing something. And what I love about war games is they just don't. They just don't do it. And you can make a decision that only hurts you. You might be forced to make a decision that only hurts you. And so I really liked that in both Nevsky and in things like South Pacific. And so in ARCs, I'm trying to bring some of that to the fore. But after I'm done with ARCs, I will probably not do another war gamey type game for a while, because I have other things I want to do, and ARCs is exhausting.
Fair enough. Scott
difficult, big project.
Scott asked, Lords of Sierra Madre rework, maybe someday.
Maybe. I mean, the thing I would love, I mean, my dream would be someone, not me, like GMT republishes the first edition of Lords of the Sierra Madre with the Pacific War style treatment that like doesn't attempt to really fix anything, cleans it up, but then makes this like authoritative critical edition. Because I do think Lords of the Sierra Madre, especially the first edition, is a super interesting game. And I wish that I could like reference it and like have it as an actual workable object and not as the pile of Xerox papers that is just my copy of it. And I know that there's some people on the Discord who've done things. I'm interested to see what Phil does with the pirate game that he's working on. Pax Spanish. Main.
Oh yeah. Yep.
I'm curious about it. Yeah. Who knows?
All right, that's it. That's a wrap.
Yeah.
I'm gonna kick you out the door because you and I will talk forever. And
yes,
I know
dangerous.
both of us. I have another live stream in less than 2 hours.
You gotta get something to eat.
I have kids to feed as well, literally. And you have a whole. You went through a gamut of things that you have to do before.
Yeah, I got a busy week. I got a meeting starting right after this. So
all right,
well,
let's get you to it. So Cole, hey, thank you for doing this, dude.
Edward, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, this is fun.
This is fun. We should talk more later, and I got to get you in a game of ARCs at some point. I want to show you this weird thing I've been building.
I'm in. I can't wait. So everybody watching live, hey, appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Support the Patreon, patreon.com/HCHQ. Cole, you can reach him on Twitter.
Yep, at Cole Whirly.
Spelled correctly, WEHRLE.
Yep, and then the email, which is like if you have something bigger that isn't quite well, actually, I'll just say my DMs are open on Twitter. I respond to them every few weeks. So feel free to send me a message there.
But he is going to Essen, so it may be a little bit. So just be patient. All right, awesome. We're out of here.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye, y'all.